Hello, family. It's time again for another update, but I think what I need to do at this point is address what I've heard a lot of Christians say about Romans 13, and also in Peter, where he talks about the submission to authorities. And I think it's very important that we place this in its proper context. The world in which the disciples inhabited was run by a Roman emperor that had no interest in their faith nor in protecting them, and they were responding in a way that was righteous to that emperor, for that is the system they found themselves in. But I have a question for you. In our system of government, who is Caesar? Who is it that bears the sword not in vain? You see, in our culture, in our laws as they stand today, the leaders of our countries, like Donald Trump and possibly Joe Biden, if his victory is allowed to stand as far as his understanding goes, or Pierre Trudeau in Canada, which I live in at the moment. Are they public servants? That's what they call themselves. Or are they our rulers? They have positions, authority, they can make certain kinds of decisions, but they are restricted by the form of government we live under, which is the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights of Canadians in Canada. And these things claim to have their government, they're overseen by the God who is there. So, who is Caesar here? Well, we are. We the people. In our culture, we are the people God will hold responsible for the direction of the country. We get to choose our leaders according to law. But when those leaders decide that they are above the law and that we are the sheep that need to be simply disciplined and brought into line with their elitist plans, they are the ones who are outside of the law. They're the ones breaking the law. They're the ones challenging the authority that God has set up, not the church, who simply says, no, we have a guaranteed right from God, who is over our government, to meet. We have a guaranteed right for certain kinds of freedom. These freedoms don't emanate by permission of government, they emanate from God himself. And so my question to you is, who bears the sword? Who is responsible to make sure that these things are followed? And again, it's we the people. It's not they in government. And there's a tendency to say, obey all the government because that's what the Bible says. Well, if the form of government says in itself that these things are supposed to be different than they are, then obeying the government is to obey the supreme law of the land, to obey the Constitution, to obey the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, to honor God, to acknowledge his rulership, and to hold those public servants accountable for the bad stewardship, the mismanagement of everything that they're doing. This is a different story than is commonly interpreted from those verses, because if you look at them on the surface, you would say, well, they said don't do 55, so the posted limit is 40, so if I do 55, I'm guilty. I would say, yes, you're right. Those things are within the parameters of those officials to make those rules and to cause them to stick, but they actually are made because we put those people in and we let them make those rules. And if they needed to be changed, we would vote for people that would run on a platform to change those things. And we do that in a very peaceful way in the West because that's always been the way. But in 1776, it was not so. We had a tyrant usurping the laws of God, turning the people into slaves. And that's precisely the situation we see ourselves in now. They claim that science is God, that we should be listening to science, and yet the science they quote is as fickle and absolutely unprovable as anything that ever called itself science, rather than evolution, perhaps. Little joke there. But the point I'm making is simple. You cannot read those passages and simply conclude that we have to bend the knee to every petty tyrant that comes along and wants to get more authority than they actually have. So, as Christians, it's time to stand up. It's time to be held accountable. And it's time, if necessary, to bear the sword, not in vain. That we will use the force needed to overthrow tyranny wherever it raises its head. And we need to make that commitment to ourselves, to our neighbors, to our fellow believers and unbelievers alike, but to God. Because God is the one who established this. God allowed this form of government to rise. He gave us the right and the freedom and the power to use it. Don't throw it away now. And we could. We could. But future generations will look back on this one and wonder why past generations were willing to die for their faith and their confidence in their God-given rights. And this generation has yet to be judged. But it's coming to the point where we may be judged. And so from God's point of view, I would remind leaders watching this video that you are not God. And you are not public rulers. You are public servants. And that is the way we are written in our laws and how we are established. And we need to have proper thinking to know how to deal with this. And that's the purpose of this video, to give people clarity, to be able to think without the shackles saying, you're being a bad little boy, bad little girl, because that's not the case. Righteousness must triumph. Righteousness and freedom must be given its head. Give me liberty or give me death, said Patrick Henry. And that's exactly where we find ourselves today. Looking down the barrel of slavery, looking down the barrel of turning back the clock hundreds of years to times when tyrants ruled over people who simply were afraid. We are not afraid. We are not afraid. And if the time comes that we have to stand up, count on it. At least this Christian will. And if I'm one of the very few, all right. I would rather die than live in slavery. That's not even a difficult choice. We'll see you later. I love you, and I hope you do get to think deeply and hard about what I've just said and about what obedience to God really means. Okay? Talk to you later.